Welcome to the Tory Burch Foundation webinar series. I'm Laurie Fabiano, the president of the Tory Burch Foundation. And today we're going to talk about care in America. And I believe that the pandemic laid bare one of the most critical problems in America. And in my opinion, the single biggest barrier to women achieving equality, which is childcare and elder care. And we saw over 1 million women leave the workforce. And why? Because childcare in America has been a patchwork of solutions. It's like all working mothers have been MacGyver. And all of a sudden, they didn't have the Band-Aids and the rubber bands and the things that they held their caregiving together with. But there is some good news on the horizon. The Biden administration just announced a historic investment in childcare, the most historic investment in childcare in the nation's history. But there's also no doubt that this goes beyond funding. The infrastructure of child and elder care in America needs to be fixed, especially for low and middle income women and for the people who provide the care. Which is why we are so pleased to have Tchen here with us today. Tina is the president and CEO of Time's Up Now and the Time's Up Foundation. She is the former assistant to President Barack Obama. She was the executive director of the White House Council on Women and Girls. She was the chief of staff to First Lady Michelle Obama. She's a champion for gender equality, workplace rights, and diversity. And my friend, Tina, welcome.
Thank you, Laurie.
Following the interview with Tina, we have 3 entrepreneurs who will share their stories of childcare and elder care during the pandemic. But we also want to hear from you. So please use the Q&A box to ask your questions and make statements. But we're going to dive right in now with Tina. And Tina, I just want to right off the bat start with, tell us about the Care Economy Business Council that Time's Up created and why you created it.
No, well, thank you, Laurie. And you set this up beautifully at the beginning. You know, the pandemic has really laid bare what those of us who've been in the workplace for a long time, and I was a single working mom my whole career, what we have, we struggled with and we knew as we were doing it. Now everybody has seen it, right? The pandemic just meant that if you were a CEO, you couldn't just leave your house anymore and assume things were being taken care of at home. You saw it all. And with schools closed, the fact that we entered the pandemic as one of only 2 countries in the world, Laurie, that have no national paid leave policy or even national paid sick leave policy, right? Just put us at a disadvantage. And so we've seen this mass exodus from the workplace. Women's labor force participation right now is at levels we have not seen since the 1980s, right? We wiped out a generation of progress in a single year. And it's largely, I agree with you, one of the biggest barriers to women being able to now fully participate in the workforce is the fact that we have no infrastructure for caregiving, is laid bare, and it's time to change that. So that's why at Time's Up, we're starting the Time's Up Care Economy Business Council to really gather business leaders, both large and small. This is not just a Fortune 500 thing. We need small and medium-sized business owners to be part of the Care Council too, to do a couple things. One is we want people who are on different stages of their care journey. So this is not like you've got to have a gold standard of caregiving policies as an employer already. You just want to be committed to learning more about what more you can do as an employer and start that journey. Number 2, we do want business voices out there in support of the public policies and public investments we need to help grow a caregiving infrastructure, which, by the way, actually will help small and medium-sized businesses the most by providing tax credits and other infrastructure so that you can afford to make sure your employees, have, caregiving options. And then finally, I'm really excited, and you and I have been having lots of conversations about this. How do we reimagine the caregiving industry, right? Both as employers, as consumers of it. This is a growth industry that has not been invested in so long. It has huge supply, demand for it, right? I had somebody pull the stats for me. There are over 3.5 million of us. I just did it myself this year, turned 65 every year. And of us, as we age, 70% of us are going to need help as we age. So that's on top of the new babies born every year, right? And this is a growth industry, and we've got to actually modernize and invest in that industry as well.
Now, there's clearly, though, low and middle income people, especially, well, actually not, I was going to say especially childcare, but that's not true. It's for both, are really disproportionately impacted. Could you tell us why, and just, paint the landscape a little of how this really truly is a crisis?
Well, it's a crisis on two fronts. One is that we know the stats that Black and brown women are overwhelmingly unpaid caregivers themselves already for their own families. Because, and especially low wage, middle wage, Black and brown women, because they can't afford, because of the lack of affordable care options and public support for it, to find other options to help bring care into the home when they need it. So they are doing that unpaid caregiving, whether it's figuring out how to do the childcare and the after school care, or caring for, an elderly or a sick relative or loved one. They're doing that. So they're getting hit on that front when they are somebody who needs care, and you're providing that unpaid caregiving on top of trying to balance your job or what you're doing to bring money into the home. And they're also overwhelmingly our caregivers, right? So when the paid caregiving workforce, elder care, home care workforce, 74% of that are women. We are overwhelmingly childcare workers. And now we're actually operating in a system that is outside usual labor force protections, right? So home care workers are not, protected by the usual wage and hour and labor, minimum wage protections. Because we have a history that goes back actually to slavery, of when this was care that was seen as uncompensated. And then it was supposed to be care that your friend did. So it's not really a job, and we're not going to really recognize it under Medicare. And then for low wage women with children, you're actually supposed to stay home with your kids. So AFDC originally was pay women to stay home with their children. So we have these antiquated legacies in our policies that mean we don't invest in these caregivers. We're not giving them a fair wage. We're not giving them labor protections. We know many of them are so vulnerable from the work we do at Time's Up by going into people's homes with no one else around and being obviously, vulnerable to the kinds of sexual harassment and other, kinds of labor abuses that can happen.
And even the women who are entrepreneurs, the women who have home-based childcare, I did the math. I had never done that before, and looked at what the government provides in vouchers and what they can charge. And these are probably some of the hardest working people in the world. And they're lucky if they can make $35,000 a year working constantly. And it's like the deck is so stacked against them, both in terms of what they're paid, but also there's a lot of laws. Like the law that just completely threw me was, if a child doesn't come in, they're not paid. So how do you run a business? I mean, we don't run our schools that way. The government and states give an allocation per student to that entity. How could you possibly run a business if a child is out for a month? You could collapse. It feels like there's so much we have to do with the infrastructure to make this work. And maybe you could just talk about that a little bit, and what you see hopefully happening with the government, and what we can do as the private sector to do this, to shore it up.
Well, infrastructure is the key buzzword these days in DC. And so let me start there, which is, what we have been seeing, and Time's Up, we are part of a coalition of organizations that works for caregiving solutions. And it's historic as a coalition because typically one of our problems as advocates is we advocate for childcare over here, and then we advocated for elder care over here. We advocated for paid leave in like a third space. We didn't advocate as a advocacy or groups as for a comprehensive solution, because that's what we need, right? We need end to end. We need from childcare all the way through to elder care. We need paid leave for yourself as a worker, so you can take the time off you need. We need fair wages and labor protections for caregivers, right? So those are the four pillars of a comprehensive caregiving solution. So we have actually come together as a coalition. It's called Care Can't Wait. Time's Up's role, just a bit, is people probably think of Time's Up as really as we were born out of the moment of sexual harassment, and we do fight against sexual harassment and for survivor justice. But we also know that you can't have a workplace where it doesn't happen in the first place if we don't have safe, fair, and equitable work for everyone. And that means full participation by women in the labor force. And as you said at the outset, Laurie, the biggest thing that's keeping women from participating in the labor force right now is the absence of a caregiving infrastructure in this country. So we came together as a coalition. We're advocating for caregiving is infrastructure. It is as critical to getting Americans back to work in this recovery period as rebuilding roads and bridges, right? Which everybody's talking about. They want to invest in rebuilding roads and bridges. Well, guess what? You can't get to work over that road or bridge if you don't have caregiving solutions at home for yourself. And if we only invest in road and bridges jobs, those are the jobs held by men, we know, predominantly, and we will not invest in the women, and then the jobs are predominantly held by women. So we cannot do that. Now, one of the things we're thrilled about is this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has been saying exactly that. You know, President Biden and Vice President Harris have really actually used the words caregiving infrastructure. The first plan that was already passed and enacted, the American Rescue Plan, makes the largest investment in publicly supported childcare since World War II. $39 billion they announced is coming out to the states through the existing American Rescue Plan. It also has, and this is important because I know there's a lot of small business owners on this call, you all need to know that it also extends the availability that was made available last year during the CARES Act for tax credits for small businesses that provide emergency paid sick leave or emergency paid family leave for your workers who have to stay home because schools are closed or get COVID or a family member have COVID, or now is expanded to giving your employees time to take the vaccine, paid leave to take the vaccine, or to recover from, a side effect from the vaccine. If you do that from now until September, you can get a tax credit for yourself as a small business owner, any business, 500 employees or less. That's in the existing rescue plan. It's already law. So that's something to look into and find out. And then
Tina, I'm just going to stop you there. I think this is so important for the folks that are on here. This is a very important benefit. My guess is most people don't even know about. So we talk, maybe we need to do another one of these just on the tax credits and what's available. But in the interim, how do people get more information about this?
Well, one of the things you can do is, and we can put it in the chat, is reach out to us at Time's Up. We actually want to, if you are actually taking advantage of this tax credit or think you might, we actually do want to hear from you because, actually the administration is interested in making sure they know businesses are getting the word out and hearing from businesses who have been, are going to take advantage of the tax credit. And we're laying the groundwork. So let's be clear. This isn't what we would call real paid leave, meaning paid leave for the broad range of reasons why people need it, but it is a stepping stone, a first step to get it. And so we see it as this stepping stone to getting a full, paid leave policy. And the important thing is small businesses frequently oppose things like a mandatory paid leave national policy without understanding that when we say we want every business to give paid leave, we provide things like tax credits and a system for small, medium-sized business owners to be able to afford to do it. Look, you're competing for talent with the big companies out there. The big companies, they can afford it. Like the big banks are giving paid leave. The big manufacturing companies, they've been giving paid leave because they can afford it. They're taking that talent away from you. This is having a national policy that sets a level playing field for everybody. And that's one of the things we're hoping to see. I think that next week, President Biden will announce the second half of his recovery plan, which is the American Families Plan. And paid leave was not in what he announced on March 31st, but we're hopeful that that paid leave will be part of that. But we do want to hear from you, and you can reach at Time's Up. And then we can provide you links too with where to find out more information. And I think, Laurie, you and I talked about getting more information out to this network, following up on these important, because there's also important things for those of you who work with low-income women You know, there are low-income women who may be able to get the child tax credit that was also just enacted. But if you make wages so low that you typically do not file a tax return, you don't have access to get it because the IRS is using those tax returns to send you money. I mean, we're talking about up to like $3,600 for young children. And it goes up to kids who are age 17. You know, for a low wage family, you know, who never got their CARES payment from last year, their COVID payments, you could get as much as $20,000 to $25,000. So another campaign Time's Up is going to be working on with United States Women over the next several weeks is to get the word out. But those of you who know, you know, low wage women, you know, work with them, that, you know, start getting the word out that they, you know, need to file their tax return, even though they don't usually, and they don't owe any taxes.
This is such an important point, and getting the word out. In fact, Jill, I just see, came in and said, you know, I'd love to volunteer supporting Tory Burch Foundation and Time's Up to get the word out. That's exactly what we need. We really need everybody to know what they're eligible for. We have this groundbreaking historic law. And as Tina said, it's just, you know, the tip of the iceberg. We have a lot more to do, but in the interim, let's help as many people as we can. And each one of us can have a role to play with that. Use your social media, use, you know, your community to get the word out of what is available. But Tina, I'd like to just ask you to talk a little bit about specifically about businesses and the Time's Up Care Council and how you are going to be supporting those businesses, what you would like them to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what we're asking people to do, and my colleague Emily Coe's in the chat, and she's going to put in more information, is to join the Care Economy Business Council, join other business leaders, you know, like the Tory Burch Foundation, JP Morgan Chase, Verizon. You know, we've got, you know, Large and Small Main Street Alliance, which is an alliance of small businesses, is part of the Care Economy Business Council. We're going to do you know, shared learning, right? And actually get information about how employers can provide caregiving solutions and options to folks, you know, and share across businesses, you know, what are you doing? Maybe there's some best practices you can adopt from someone else. Maybe you will meet other people in your region who, you know, are looking for caregiving solutions. We're going to advocate for more public investment in policies. So for example, the American Rescue Plan we just talked about, and that's the bill that was signed into law by President Biden. On March 31st, he announced his American Jobs Plan, which included, for example, a paid solution, you know, minimum wage and labor protections for caregivers. It announced a historic $400 billion investment in eldercare. You know, we have historically underinvested in at-home and community-based care. We're overinvested in long-term care facilities like nursing homes, which we now see from the pandemic may not be the best place for people to be in. And most people want to be cared for in their own home. So there's an historic investment in that. And so we want to keep advocating for that. You know, the Republicans are balking. You know, we need to use our voices as business leaders to say, no, this is what we want. And then we are hoping that next week, President Biden will actually announce additional things like a national paid leave policy and efforts. So we as businesses, and especially, as I said, the small and medium-sized businesses on this call, you are going to benefit from those programs. And so making clear that there isn't like just business opposition to these kinds of investments. This is actually something you need to grow the economy is going to be critical to have. And so that's going to be, you know, one of the things we really want to have happen. And then we will be providing information, getting best practices out. One of the things we will shortly have that we got from some roundtables we did with businesses starting last winter is a leader's guide to caregiving solutions for employers. Right. So we've actually done some research and we'll be putting together some best practices. We're going to put it out in an easy to use and read guide. And we'll keep actually adding to that over time to give people solutions, right? You know, how would you do something on site for yourself? How would you link up with the home care providers in your in your neighborhood or in your employee's neighborhood? You know, what are people doing by way of stipends or other kinds of ways to help people offset it? How do you access things like the employer tax credits that are out there? You know, the Care Economy Business Council will be in a vehicle for getting that word out to folks.
Okay, this might have to wait for the tax credit discussion, but someone asked is, how do the tax credits apply to contractors, freelancers? Are they going to be included in this? Because a lot of this economy is contractors and freelancers.
So I don't know the specific details, and we can follow up, Lori. I'm guessing, just because this is the way most of our um, employer-based, federal programming works, is typically it's got to be your salary, or hourly wage employees, right? Not your contractor employees that this applies to. That in terms of getting the tax credit. I will say that
That's
doesn't keep.
a good point, because it is an industry with a lot of contractors in it, and maybe it's something we need to advocate for at the government level.
There's a huge other, and I was just having a conversation with a big employer who uses a lot of their business plans, contracted workers. And, they are really looking for some regulatory and legal changes. The push pull has been, if you give somebody too many benefits, then all of a sudden they're assumed to be your employee, and then get all those protections. But there's got to be a way of reimagining that, right, in a gig economy, right? What are the key protections that even a gig worker needs, without bringing along with it all the other regulatory, bells and whistles that maybe a gig worker doesn't need and a gig employer doesn't need. And so I think it's a really good point that we need to reimagine that way. Here's the thing, Laurie, we are using our labor structures, including this lack of caregiving. It's like a century old, right? Our economy is using rules and regulations and infrastructure that is over a century old. And it's time, it's the 21st century to really have, these kinds of programs that work for an economy that is getting driven by women, by people of color, that is got gig workers, that needs flexibility into it, that's the engine of our economy, really, right? And this is the time to rebuild that.
Absolutely. There's just someone, Quindaro asked about how the states can get involved right now and what we could do to address the gaps in state and local laws. Erica asked about, how do we share information from the council to early childhood educators. We need to move on because we have some amazing other speakers as well. So I would like to ask you to put your contact information or get in contact with Emily, who's on the chat. And so Emily can help, answer those questions, but also maybe get you involved, especially if you're willing to help get the word out. Okay. Yeah. And so, but I think we should be moving on because we have three incredible women with us. They're all Tory Burch Fellows who are navigating the care crisis. Christina Hahn, Renee Graham, and DJ Lozada. Welcome. DJ, you there? Come on. There we go. Okay, great. So we're going to jump right in. And Christina Hahn is from Washington, D.C. She's the founder of the beauty education platform, Own Your Wonder. She's a mom of 3 with a 6-year-old with special needs. And inspired by her challenges during the pandemic, she launched a second business, Learn-A-Do, which is a platform to support kids with learning disabilities in distance learning. Welcome, Christina. And can you tell us about what you faced with your son during the pandemic and what led you to create Learn-A-Do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I think my theme is, when things get so hard, you start a second business. So my story is that I have now a 7-year-old son who was born with a rare chromosome disorder, resulting in him having complex medical needs and being deafblind. So when the pandemic hit and the schools closed, my son wasn't able to access any of the virtual learning that was offered by his public school. So I became his primary teacher and therapist. I have, as Laurie mentioned, 2 other kids, 8 and 1 at the time when the pandemic started. So I had to put my business on the back burner. I closed our retail location and pivoted to offer online classes. and just crossed my finger that we could tread water and survive the pandemic. In the meantime, I started building a team of educators outside the school to help my son. And in doing so, I realized there are so many other children with need for individualized education and care who need to resort to learning opportunities outside the school, but they don't have any tool to help them through this process, including the initial stage of figuring out what should my child's learning plan be and how do I collaborate and communicate with the educators outside the school system on their progress and participation. So I started creating a sort of a management system for my son and decided to turn that into a business called Learn-A-Do to help other parents like me. You know, ultimately, I think this is a serious equity issue. We think about internet access and laptop distribution when people talk about equity in education. And I equate education and care here because when you have young children, they're basically one and the same. And school systems currently can't meet all the needs of children with learning differences and disabilities. And at the same time, all the innovation that's happening in education is geared towards scaling the learning for the masses, powered by technology, which many of the kids like my son cannot access. And if you have further limitations because of your economic situation, language barriers, geographic and cultural constraints, you're further penalized and you're at the mercy of the current school system. And we talk about infrastructure. I mean, I think that everybody can agree on all the weaknesses that we have with the current school infrastructure. You are doubly penalized and you're at the mercy of this inadequate system. I feel very fortunate that as a lawyer, I am able to advocate for my son in and out of school and fight with insurance companies. But if you don't have the resources like I do, I fear that parents and their children continue to fall behind. So for me, this has been an awakening experience of seeing what an issue there is on the equity side, but also special needs children don't seem to make it on the agenda of having a place in conversations about care or conversations about equity. So that's what drove me to start a second business. And I think somebody mentioned in the chat box a sandwich generation. I agree. A lot of us have children to care for, but also parents to care for. I have an 80-year-old father who has dementia, and I was saying that I organize play dates for my dad when I do the same for my daughter. So it's been a tough year, but also really an awakening year for me to understand all the issues that we face in the care crisis.
Christina, you're not giving yourself enough credit. You came up with a great solution. You found another 80-year-old man. Tell us about these dual play dates you arranged.
Yeah, so I was talking to a mom, my daughter's friend's mom, who and we were just sort of sympathizing about each other's father with dementia experience. So we decided to do a play date at the same time when my daughter and her daughter do a play date. And it's been actually a really funny experience because when you have two men with dementia having a conversation, it should be like a live stream reality show. It's great because they get to be in a different environment and they get to have friends. My father and this particular other father hasn't had a social experience with anybody else for a whole year, and just watching that, and I mean, it's every Wednesday except for today is when I go and buy Chick-fil-A for my dad, for my daughter as well, and my dad is so happy. It's like being a kid again. So
that's great. But Learn-A-Do is a platform. I mean, my two older kids are both teachers of emotionally disturbed kids, special needs, and I think that just as Tina said, the care infrastructure is archaic. there was a silver lining to the pandemic, and I think we realized that there are digital solutions to some of the things that we need to fix. And just like you creating Learn-A-Do to engage parents and students better, that, you know, we have to look that we all figured out new ways to do things this year. Now we have to figure out new ways to do things forever in this care community, and certainly in education as well. But following up, Renee Graham is from Austin, Texas, and she's the founder of Renozo Box, a customizable beauty kit. At the start of the pandemic, Renee's mother went to Taiwan, and Renee had to step in and care for her aging dad. What was that experience like, and what do you want people to understand about the demands of elder care, Renee?
Hey, Laurie. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and I'm happy to share my story. Yeah, so I moved in with my dad in the house that I grew up in Dallas, Texas. And I think the two key takeaways that I have from the experience are, one is that elder care can sneak up on you, especially if there's not a plan in place. And I don't think it's something that we talk about a lot, about, you know, at least in my family, it's just kind of, you don't necessarily see what is ahead, or like know what's going to be happening, and it can definitely sneak up on you. And the other key takeaway I had is that elder care, it's multifaceted. So my father, for example, he's retired now. He's 80. He just turned 84 this past Saturday. We celebrated his birthday. But he has an insurance business that my mom was kind of overseeing, and he doesn't go in day to day, but it's a small business, and that needed care while my mom was gone. So I had to take over that business as well, which Renzo Box is in the beauty industry. It's not in the insurance industry. And even though I worked at my dad's office growing up, it was like I had to come up with this entire plan. You know, like I was responsible, just to give you an idea, I was responsible for PPP and EIDL loans for 4 different entities. And that was not on my plate, right? And then outside of just like, you know, the finances and the business sort of struggles, you know, there's the personal and the household side. Things like just making meals each day, and making sure that my dad took his medication on time, and making sure that, you know, like I remember in July, the AC broke down at my parents' place, and like getting someone in to replace the AC and coordinating with, you know, my dad being 83 at the time, and you know, all the unknowns, and keeping him safe, and having workers come in and out of the house and that sort of thing. It just, you know, they sound like regular household things, but this was, you know, I had my own, you know, personal life and household in Austin, plus this other, you know, new household I'm taking care of, and you know, new sort of things on top of my business and my dad's business. So it's like it piles up quickly, and it's so multifaceted, and you don't even realize the nuances of all these different needs. And then, yeah, the sneaking up part was, you know, every family is different, and just the dynamics of the way it worked in my family was, you know, the responsibilities fell on me. And, you know, I love my dad and I love my family, so of course I'm going to do what I need to do to, you know, to provide support. And I think that's kind of a thing that a lot of daughters do. You know, there's almost like this unspoken duty of a daughter to want, you know, to take care, and maybe, you know, assumptions that I didn't even realize, you know, existed. And I just wanted to step in and you know, be part of the solution and help. And it's caused me to kind of, you know, think and question, you know, ask these questions around like, you know, do gender dynamics even exist in my own family, where I would never have assumed that, because my family's always been very supportive of me. And I definitely encourage women out there to think about it. And for sure, you know, if you're not having conversations around care of parents, doing it early on and trying to think through all of these things, because I definitely did not, and it was much more than I anticipated. And care planning, I think, it's different from, I don't have children of my own, although I was a stepmother for a while, but like I think it's different in the aspect of like, you don't know when it's going to come about, you know, and every aging parents, they have different needs. You don't know if, you know, the medical conditions, right? And how much, you know, what is their mental capacity and their physical capacity, and what can't you want them to be as autonomous as possible for as long as possible. So trying to integrate their needs and their desires to maintain their autonomy, it's a lot to juggle. So and of course the financial aspects of it too. You know, money is great, but you can't just throw money at a problem and think it's going to fix everything, because there's still that care aspect of being a caretaker and the needs that they're going to have. So yeah, that was my experience.
That point about creating a plan, and well, first step, having the conversation and creating a plan, I think is such a critical one as people are living longer, and all parents, we need to not be caught unaware. And I think most people these days are caught unaware by all of a sudden having to care for a parent when you might be, as Christina said, also caring for little children. And that's a really hard thing to do, as we know. DJ is the founder of Texas-based Soul Popped Gourmet Popcorn, and the digital fundraising platform called Good Trouble Gourmet, which is such a great name, as we know from its inspiration. DJ, you employ a team of 5 people, and you've always been supportive of your staff needing to take maternity and paternity leave, but you found yourself needing to provide a lot of other support during the pandemic. What was that, and how did that play out for you?
You know, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm greatly enjoying this conversation. It's much needed. You know, it's all the things that's already been said. Just as we have challenges, our staff has challenges. So they have family needs, different things pulling at them, different things that come up. And so for me, as the leader of our team, I had to be very flexible and make sure that they had what they needed to be okay, so that we could be okay as a team, you know, as for the business. And so just being very flexible with time off, understanding that I wasn't the only one having challenges. And then to Renee's earlier point, really taking the time to consider, to make sure that I'm not projecting gender bias onto my staff. So, you know, family leave is not just for women. And the expectation that only women need family leave or maternity leave, I think, does us all a disservice. And so just really communicating to my staff, to both men and women, that your family was important to me, their concerns and their needs mattered, and that I would be as flexible as you needed to make sure that you had the time to take care of your family, and making the men feel equally empowered as the women to ask for that time. And I think that a lot of the times, you know, men love their families too, and they often want to be there for their newborns and their wives, but the expectation is that they shouldn't ask for that time. And a lot of times it's unspoken, and a lot of times it's not even really true, but because that's what the projection is, it's widely kind of understood that women ask for time off to take for family and men don't. And so when you as the leader articulate to the staff beforehand that you respect their need as men to care for their families, I think it's made a huge difference. Yeah. And I am equally open to men saying, hey, I need to take my mom to her doctor's appointment, or, you know, my son is homesick today and I need to be home with my son. And saying okay as quickly as I would, as if it were coming from one of my female staff members.
I can't say how important that is. I think, DJ, you just hit upon something in that we oftentimes through our own unconscious biases, keep things culturally, in buckets. And by you just saying, it's totally okay if you need to do this, it's huge. And I think any of us in those positions where we can normalize men taking more of a role, either both in the childcare and in elder care, that's fantastic. So I really think what you've done is amazing. But one other thing I want to ask you, DJ, is a lot of small companies, and we touched upon it a little bit, are afraid of, don't think they can afford to be as flexible, or to, what would you have to say to a small company that's afraid of providing more both flexibility and benefits in these areas?
I think I would tell them that inattention to your staff's needs, their family care needs, is too expensive for you to ignore. I really believe that my greatest asset to my business is not the business, it's the people who make the business happen. And so it just has to come down to recognizing that the same challenges that we have as founders and as leaders is not an isolated thing just to us. Our staff is doing the same thing. And they're doing it at a much greater deficit sometimes because they're not necessarily empowered to take that time off. And my philosophy has always been, and I think it's because of the time that I spent in Europe. I worked abroad for 10 years and I got to see how much family time was built into the work week for, according to like a European model. And I just personally believe as a principle that no one should ever have to ask for permission to take care of their family.
Absolutely.
And so my philosophy has always been in business, as small as we are, I stress what our needs are. We know what our deadlines are. You know what your responsibilities are. And if you need to move things around so that you can care for your family, let's just make sure the work is done. So it doesn't matter necessarily that you're doing it between the hours of 2 and 3 o'clock. It's, did we do what needed to be done? And so it's creating that culture where family matters. And I think it all kind of falls into a line. I have better retention from my employees. They're less stressed out, so I'm less stressed out. And I know I feel good about building a culture that's so family friendly because that's what I needed. Why would I build something that didn't serve me? It didn't work to push that on to someone else. So that's the advice I would give.
So we have a poll question to ask everybody who's listening right now. We want to hear from all the small business owners who are on today. The poll is on your screen, and I'll just let you go ahead and take that, and if we'll recap the results when we get them. But while that's happening, I'd like to ask the three of you all the same question, which is, as we advocate for better corporate and public policies, what changes would you each like to see? And let's take this in the order that I guess we spoke. So starting with you, Christina.
For me, obviously my focus is on special needs, and it is really putting an emphasis on the minority of group of children who are impacted greater than everybody else in the childcare, but also in education. I personally have been advocating for a particular legislation called Cogswell-Macy Act that's in the Congress right now to have a federal mandate of teachers training on deaf blindness. And without that, my son is not entitled to any services within school. This is why I had to educate my son outside of the school. So it is just acknowledging and including conversations on special needs children and children with learning differences.
Great, thank you for that. So Renee, is there corporate and public policies that you think that could impact what you went through, and or just even infrastructure changes? Like I did want to even ask you, did you feel like you had any other options other than jumping in and caring for your dad?
I did not, honestly. I don't think anyone in my family really, we just had to do, we did what we had to do, and it fell on my shoulders, and I don't think there were other options available. And I think, it's for every family to kind of work out and figure something out. And you're asking about policy change. I think one of the things that, maybe this isn't a policy, but something that can be normalized, which is, talking about care planning in the same way we think about family planning and financial planning. We think about, how much do we need to save for kids going to college? And there's all these tools and resources available for these types of things, but we don't, we're at the cusp of the baby boomer generation aging into the, where they need care, and responsibility is going to fall onto, the shoulders of the younger generation, of their kids. And I don't even know the questions to ask. I don't know, when I should start paying attention to certain things, like when do we need to, look at finances of things, or amongst siblings, if, how are we going to work out, different roles and responsibilities, and resources available to that, to just kind of set up a template at least, so that, as a family, we can work through this together and really start asking the hard questions and figuring it out. That would be incredible.
So Victoria just said it as something very, very practical advice. She said, people should consider hiring or retaining a geriatric social worker from the local human services department or state services. My guess is that there are some resources. As always, there are resources for people who can afford to pay for them, because that's just how this country has worked. I think we're going to have to look at how do we provide care for everybody with or without those resources. But I think that's a very practical and good suggestion for people who can afford it right now. So DJ, as a business owner who's managing, staff, what are the public policy changes that you'd like to see changed?
One of the things I would like to see come about is a national family care act that is equal for men and for women. I think that women have long struggled with the stigma of having to have maternity leave, and that affects our ability to make the same pay. It's used for justification for lower pay, for a lot of inequities in the workplace. So my thoughts are, if we standardize it for men and for women, if we normalize it, then that kind of undercuts a lot of those arguments that currently exist and biases that exist in the workplace against women, because if men feel empowered to take advantage of it, then it's no longer an issue, because they're getting the same benefit that they think women are getting. And so that would be my recommendation.
That's great. I'd like to bring Tina back on, and I'd like for you guys to stick around. And so Tina, before we close up a little bit, did you have any questions for Renee, Christina, or DJ, or comments on what you just heard?
Well, first of all, it was an amazing conversation. So thank you to the three of you for telling your personal stories, because it really illustrates the range of issues that we have, and for talking about the importance, of providing these solutions as both business owners and as people who sort of need the care. It's such an important message to get out there. And the special needs piece, remember, this isn't just childcare and not just elder care. It is disability services. It is home and community-based care for that full range of needs that folks have. So that's all, really critically important. So I'm just grateful to the three of you for that. One of the things I think that we need to do more of, and there's so many people in the chat who've been doing this, is share those stories. with your legislators, for example, policymakers, because they're not hearing us. There's folks who keep saying this isn't important, or it's not infrastructure, or there's not support. We actually know when you poll it, there's overwhelmingly bipartisan support among the people out there, because we're all living it and struggling with it. We got to get that through to the legislators and policymakers. So continuing to tell that story, and both as people who need caregiving and as business owners who need help in making sure that you can invest in your workforce. I mean, some of the phrases that you guys came up with, I love that sort of care planning piece, Renee, that you had, DJs, like what you're talking about is normalizing this and making the investments is so critical. And Christina, just those challenges of a parent with special needs, and your creativity in responding, creating a business that responds to those needs is amazing. So thank you all.
And I just have to say, these are 3 of the 50 annual Tory Burch Foundation Fellows. And you can see by these 3 absolutely incredible women, what a joy and honor it is to run this fellows program, because there are extraordinary women out there doing extraordinary things. And quite honestly, until we did this talk, I did not know that the 3 of them were dealing with this. And one of the things that we were just chatting about before we all came on is that we don't talk about this enough, even amongst ourselves. It really is like we think that we have to be these super people, and because we're women, we just have to deal with it. Well, we just have to figure out the care for either our children or our elderly parents, and we act like it's not a big deal. And this country has a very an awful history of just not addressing care in America, and hopefully that changes now. This is the silver lining of COVID. We saw how bad it really was, and we have an administration that's responding now, but I just have to stress that's not enough. We're all going to have to get involved and create this, I hate to use the word again, but this infrastructure that's going to support children, parents, special need children, and hopefully also impact our education system as well, which is wanting, as we all know. So thank you to the 3 of you very much. And I just want to say that the Tory Burch Foundation and Tory Burch, the company, has joined the Time's Up Care Economy Council. And we really urge you all to do so as well, even if you're a small business. And Tina, tell them why they should do it, how they should do it.
All right, so Emily Coe has put it in the chat, a few times, and she's also put her individual contact information. You can also just text JOIN to 30644 just to get more information about Time's Up, and that'll get you sort of in, on our contact list as well. But please, part of the reason to join the Care Economy Business Council is for yourself, which is you're going to get information and tools and be able to share ideas and ask questions and, get tools. That's one of the things we want to do, is we want to provide employers with solutions, and we want to crowdsource from you solutions to share with others, because we don't talk about this. We don't talk about it as individuals. We don't talk about it as businesses and business leaders to share it. And we want to change that. And then, so that's one reason to join. The second reason to join is, to realize the public policies and investments we want to see as caregivers and as employers. We got to work for it. As supportive as the Biden-Harris administration is on this, they cannot do it themselves. It's a lesson I learned painfully during the Obama years, right? Which was, a lot of people just assumed we were in office and we were going to take care of things, and it just doesn't work. Our democracy doesn't work that way. So it's really important to make sure that we have it, and we will help you figure out who are the key people who need to hear from folks in which states and when that needs to happen, what the schedule is as bills are moving through the Congress. but also this is a long-term effort. Finally, I'll just close with that. You know, we're not organizing this just because there's bills pending in DC right now. We see this as, you know, a multi-year effort and a organizing group we want to, you know, hold together for over the course of the next several years. It's taken us generations to get in this fix. It's going to take a lot more than a few months to get out of it. And businesses, large and small, are a key solution here. And we want to build this, you know, caregiving economy in a way that works for you as business owners and as consumers of caregiving. And so that's the long-term opportunity here, as well as to create this community of business leaders who are sharing that information together, who are working together on this. And I'm really excited about it. As you know, Laurie, you and I are both really excited about the possibilities here to not just address the immediate needs that we've heard about, but address them in a way that actually empowers the women, you know, Black and brown and Asian women who are caregivers right now, and empowers you as business owners.
That's perfect. And just one question for you. Is there anything right now, I know by joining the council, you'll keep everybody informed, but is there anything people should be advocating with their legislators or their companies right now? Or should we just stay tuned?
No, well, the first right now, because President Biden has put the American Jobs Plan on the table. Next week, I believe the second step of that, the Americans Families Plan, will be announced. It includes, for example, the $400 billion for home and community-based services for the elderly and the disabled. I hope that next week he's going to announce paid leave. Right now, saying that caregiving, and you don't have to get down in the weeds on the policies. I think just sending the message to your members of Congress and senators that caregiving is important to you, and you think it's infrastructure and it's important and needs to be funded and supported is enough right now. And over time, we'll have more details, but that message needs to get out there. There are plenty of people right now saying, well, I'll fund the roads and bridges, but I don't know about this other stuff. The other stuff is really important. And, you know, letting them know that you think caregiving, you know, just broadly framed investments in caregiving are critically important to make right now as we're getting our economy, you know, out of the hole that we are in after, you know, the pandemic is really important. And just as simple as that right now can be done.
Wonderful. So if nothing else, we can all be advocates. So I encourage you to talk about this issue with your family and friends. We have to raise the level of awareness of childcare and elder care in our country, commiserate with its critical importance. I'll leave you with a recent quote by Vice President Kamala Harris. She said, "The strength of our country, the resilience of our economy, depends on the affordability and the availability of childcare." And we would also add elder care as well. Thank you so much to Tchen and to Christina, Renee, and DJ. And thank you all for joining us. And please stay tuned and please join the Care Economy Business Council that Time's Up has. Thank you very much. Take care.